Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things and welcome to another video. And today I'm going to be doing a bit of a check-in on my 2019 reading goals and how they're going so far. So this is something I wanted to start doing on my channel, partly because I want to keep like a closer eye on my reading goals, because otherwise I have a tendency of like setting goals at the beginning of the year and then I go back to my goals video at the end of the year and I'm like, oh yeah, that was something I was intending to do that I didn't do. And also partly because I've kind of added lots of new goals to my reading goals since I made my reading goals video at the beginning of the year, which I will link down below. So I thought I would talk about some of that today. And also because I promised that I would make videos every now and then on my Troth project and how it's going, I thought I would cover that in here as well. So let's talk about all the goals. To go through some of my goals that I set at the beginning of 2019, which was crazily now 3 months ago, or just over 3 months ago. I'm filming this video on the 31st of March. I'm sure it will be going up a week or two after that, but this is how I'm doing as of the very end of March. So at the beginning of the year, I said that I was setting my Goodreads goal to 80 books, but that I would be actually aiming to read 100 books, and I was setting it to 80 because I knew I'd be doing some reading for work, which I couldn't necessarily count on Goodreads, but that I was setting it like as a personal goal of 100, because that's usually, I usually read more than 100 books in a year. So far this year, being at the end of March, Goodreads says I have read 29 books, but I actually read 50 books, so I will definitely have read, by the end of the year, more than 80 books on Goodreads, and I'll definitely have read way more than 100 books. To be honest, I think I could up my Goodreads goal to 100, even more, especially because quite a few of the books I've read at the beginning of the year that I can't currently count on Goodreads by the end of the year will be published, and so we'll be able to count them on Goodreads. So that goal's going fine. In terms of some of my other goals, I haven't yet read The Hunchback of Notre Dame, which was my like one book to read in 2019, but I've got 9 months left, so that's fine. I haven't really been reading more poetry and short stories. I haven't really read any poetry. I've read 2 short story anthologies and that's all, but you know, that's fine. I may or may not do that this year. It's not a massive priority for this year, but I might make it more of a priority for next year, but anyway, we'll see. One of my other goals was to read more contemporary fiction. So I am reading a lot more contemporary fiction, but that's because I'm reading a lot of stuff for work, which of course is all contemporary. But actually that means that because everything I read for work is contemporary, I often really want to read classics when I'm reading not for work. So I think I'm sort of doing this goal, but vaguely. Another few of my goals. Here is my TBR jar, which I'm supposed to pick 1 or 2 books out of every month to read stuff for. Not doing so well on this. I've read 2 books from my TBR jar so far this year, which it would be okay if I was only supposed to be picking 1 out every month, but I had been aiming to do 1 or 2 and have been hoping to do 2 every month. So in that sense, I'm not doing so well. I'm also in general doing quite poorly this year at reading my own damn books, as the challenge usually goes, in that of the 50 books I've read so far this year, I own physical copies of 7 of them. Partly that's because I read a lot for work and because I read a lot of audiobooks, but I've also been using the library a lot, which on the one hand is good and nice and I like the library, but also there's a lot of books on my shelves that I really want to read that I really need to start reading, so I'm going to try and do better at that in the next 9 months till the end of 2019. And I think certainly in April, because I'm going away for sort of 10 days, I'm hoping to only take with me like physical books that I own already, not any library books, so hopefully I will get through some of my physical books that have been sat on my shelves looking at me for a while. Another challenge that I'm taking part in this year is the Reading Through the Ages challenge, which is a kind of bingo card challenge system set up by Mel from Mel's Bookland Adventures and Victoria from Eve's Alexandria. I have been really enjoying taking part in this so far. I have ticked off 6 squares on the Reading Through the Ages bingo card, but I won't lie, 4 of them are wild cards. So I've been reading lots of historical fiction, but I haven't necessarily been achieving many of the challenges, but that's what the wild cards are for, so I'm going to carry on ticking things off as I read it. Like I think I said with this challenge, I do read lots of historical fiction in general, so this is to kind of push me to pick up books that are on my TBR already that might fit into a particular category. I'm not necessarily aiming to complete the bingo card and to tick everything off and to like go and search out books that I don't already own or that aren't easily accessible to me, but it's a fun challenge and I've been really enjoying kind of doing a bit more kind of focused historical fiction reading, I suppose. Another kind of challenge that I set for myself for 2019 was to read 12 books by authors on my authors I want to read more by list, which is a video I made for Vlogmas, and I'll link that down below. So I've read 2 so far this year, which considering it's the end of the 3rd month I think is fine. I think I will probably read 12 books or 12 authors from this list over the course of the year. So the two that I've read for that is Affinity by Sarah Waters and Where Angels Fear to Tread by Ian Forster, both of which I really loved. This follows what happens when a widow marries a man 10 years her junior who is Italian from a much lower class than her, and what her late husband's family think of this. And this follows two women in the Victorian period, one of whom is in prison and the other of whom is going to see her. Both of these were really fantastic and just, yeah, cemented my love for both of these authors a lot. And then finally, of course, for the goals that I set at the beginning of 2019 is my Trollope project, which is going very well. I have read a book by Anthony Trollope every month in the first 3 months of this year. Back in January, I read Phineas Finn, which is the second book in the Palliser series, and this follows a young man called Phineas who is Irish but living in London, who has been a barrister but is invited to run for Parliament and sees this as a good opportunity. And he is sometimes foolish, often makes the wrong decisions, gets into debt quite a lot, gets into a lot of trouble with love, and often struggles to do the right thing, yet also kind of stands by his principles. I really, really enjoyed this one. Probably my favourite Trollope book I've read so far this year, although I didn't love it quite as much as the first book in the Palliser series, which was Can You Forgive Her, which is my favourite from the Pallisers so far. And then in February, I read Cousin Henry, which is a standalone Anthony Trollope book, which looks at a will dispute. An elderly man who is a squire dies, leaving a commonly recognised will that leaves all the money to his nephew, who everyone knows that he didn't like. But there are rumours that he also made another will shortly before he died, leaving the money to his niece Isabel, who he loved very, very much, who he had considered leaving his estate to previously but had decided against it because she was a woman and he felt that the fortune and the estate ought to run in the male line, and he was kind of conflicted between affection and duty. And it kind of follows what goes on from there, and we follow both Henry and Isabel. Henry is an incredibly dislikable character and does morally dubious things, but is also really interesting to follow. And I must say that one of the things I really like about Anthony Trollope's writing style is the fact that a lot of the times his heroes and heroines are not very nice people, and actually that can be quite engaging and really interesting too. He writes sympathetic bad people very, very well. Talking of which, the book I read for the Trollope project in March was The Eustace Diamonds, which is the third book in the Palliser series and follows a woman called Lizzie Eustace who is left widowed at a very young age. She knew that her husband was ill before they got married, and she basically married him entirely for his money, and after his death she is left with a son and with a £10,000 diamond necklace, which his family say is an heirloom and shouldn't be left with her and doesn't belong to her, and she claims it does belong to her. And legal disputes and moral and family disputes follow, and Lizzie in general is quite a scheming, unpleasant person. She reminded me a lot of Lady Susan from Jane Austen's Lady Susan, and we follow her and various characters around her and all of the usual Trollope drama. It's very good fun. Like I said, Trollope writes sympathetic, slightly unpleasant people really, really well, and I would say the same not just for Lizzie, who is really, really unpleasant, but also for her cousin Frank, who isn't unpleasant exactly. He means well, but he often does the wrong thing, a little bit like Phineas and Phineas Finn. So it was very interesting as well to follow him and his kind of keeping on doing the wrong thing and you're a bit cross with him, but also you still like him kind of dynamic. Trollope does that so, so well. So those are the goals that I set back at the beginning of 2019 in my goals video, but I have added a few other goals to my list, sort of, or at least I have made myself a new goals tool, which is this spreadsheet, which technology providing is currently appearing in this corner here. So what I did to begin with back in January was I started writing a list of like the things that I needed to do every month for my reading goals, which was mostly just the Trollope project, possibly the authors I want to read more by, and also the TBR jar. And then I started having a bigger think about what like my perfect reading month would look like, where it was like really nicely balanced and I read everything I wanted to read. And I came up with a list of 10 different kinds of books or different categories of books that I would like to read in a month. Say I read 10 books in a month that aren't for work, what would I like them to be? And this was the list I came up with. And what I thought I would do is keep this spreadsheet, and like I don't have to tick off everything every month, but I want to tick off as much as I can every month, and if I'm not really sure what to read, then that's a good thing for me to go to and think, okay, well I haven't read this kind of book for a while, so I will add that to the list. And I'm really actually enjoying having this. I have it stuck up on my fridge and I tick things off as I go, and I'm finding it really satisfying and really helpful. I feel like my reading has been quite balanced so far this year. Obviously I haven't read enough books that I own, that's definitely true, but I think that's partly because I've been trying to achieve some of these goals, which in a way is like really nice too, and I have had a really good reading year so far this year. I think for me this is quite a nice way of doing reading goals, and I think this is definitely what I'm going to do next year as well. And I think like I'm not going to have the same goals next year, but I think I'll make another spreadsheet of like 10 different kind of books for an ideal reading month, and then see how many I can tick off throughout the course of the year. Like I'll probably replace some, like obviously I'm not going to do the Trollope project next year, I don't think, so I'll replace that with maybe like reading a short story collection every month or something like that. But anyway, I wanted to quickly go through the things on this list and how I'm doing on them so far, because I've been really enjoying ticking this off, and I find it really satisfying to have like, okay, in an ideal month, if I were to read 10 books, what would these 10 books be, and then see kind of how I go. So of course at the top we have my Trollope project books, which so far I've read one of in January, February and March and have been really enjoying. Then just below that I have my authors to read more by books, which I kind of forgot about in January and February, but then in March I read both Affinity and Where Angels Fear to Tread, which I really enjoyed, and I'm hoping I will continue to read more on that list throughout the year. Basically this, if you didn't watch that video back in Vlogmas, is a bunch of authors who I've read 1 or 2 books by before that I really loved, but then I haven't read very much more of their work, and kind of authors I want to delve further into their work really. Beneath that I have my long-term Victorian TBR, which I didn't mention in my goals video for 2019, but actually is something I've been reading quite a lot from so far this year and really enjoying. So back in Victober I made a video which was called like my long-term Victorian TBR, in which I talked about like Victorian books that I want to read long term, and a lot of Victorian books and literature that I'm really interested in. So I've been trying to read, as well as an Anthony Trollope book every month, I've been trying to read a non-Anthony Trollope book for my like long-term Victorian TBR, which I've done well on so far. I read 2 back in January, I think, when I read No Name and Diary of a Nobody, and then I read Esther Waters back in February, and I read Widowers' Houses in March. One thing I really found in 2018 was that I did read a reasonable amount of Victorian literature in the year, but most of it was in Victober, and actually for a lot of the year I didn't read any Victorian literature, and I felt that I was really missing it. Whereas this year, like reading 1 Anthony Trollope book and 1 or 2 other Victorian books a month so far, I found really enjoyable, because I really love Victorian literature, and while I have read a lot of it, there is still a lot of it for me yet to discover, and it's really nice to kind of have a dedicated like slot for Victorian literature every month, which is fun. So yeah, hoping to continue with that for the rest of the year. And obviously, like, for all of these goals, this is my ideal month, but for months like July and October, where I'm doing Jane Austen July and Victober, then all the rest of my like categories will kind of go to the wind, which is fine. Next, I have my TBR jar pick. So as I said, I haven't done fantastically at picking things from my TBR jar so far, though I have read 2 books which were TBR jar picks, one of which was Affinity, which also is on my authors to read more by list. So like my idea with this spreadsheet is that it doesn't matter if I double up on like monthly challenges, that's absolutely fine by me, because it's not like, the idea is just these are the kind of books I would like to read every month, rather than like I must read 1 of each of these books. Yeah, so the 2 books that I've read so far this year that I picked out of my TBR jar were Affinity by Sarah Waters and Our Endless Numbers Days by Claire Fuller, both of which I enjoyed a lot, especially Affinity. So that's not as many books from my TBR jar as I would like to have read at this point in the year, but I'm hoping I will continue to pick things out of my TBR jar and read more throughout the year. And next I have a buddy read category. I can't remember if I spoke about this in my 2019 goals or not, but one thing I kind of had vaguely in my head that I'd like to do more of in 2019 is buddy read more, and ideally to like buddy read 1 book a month seems quite nice to me. I have done at least 1 buddy read a month so far this year, which is nice. So that's just like another thing that I'm kind of aiming to do every month. Another thing I'm kind of aiming to do every month roughly is read a review copy. Obviously I don't necessarily get sent a review copy every month, but I think I definitely get sent more than 12 review copies in a year, unless I just say no to everything because I don't have time. But I've definitely, like, I've received more than 3 review copies already this year, so I have a bit of a tendency to get a bit behind on review copies. Not always, but often when I get sent books to review, I'll either read them like the moment they arrive, or I won't read them for several months. I'm trying to get better at that. So one thing I thought was that if I kind of include in my goals that vaguely I'd like to read a review copy every month, then I might actually start doing it. And I mean, so far I've read 2, but yeah. Basically so far, like, February I was really busy, I didn't read as much, so there's less ticks, and then January is fairly ticked, and March is I read everything that I wanted to read in March, so that's nice. And then I have Reading Through the Ages, which is the bingo card historical fiction challenge, which again, I've read something that counts for that every month so far this year, because I really like historical fiction. I am counting for this books that I read for work that aren't published. Books I read for work wouldn't count for all challenges, but for Reading Through the Ages, because I do work on some historical fiction, they will count, and that's fine by me. Then I also have Japanese fiction down on the list. I really love Japanese literature, and there was a moment a few years ago where I got really into Japanese literature. I read a lot of Japanese literature, and then I kind of had got through every piece of Japanese literature that I owned, and so I didn't read very much Japanese literature for a while. But it's something I really like, and something I would like to keep on seeking out, because I know that I tend to really enjoy it, especially realist Japanese fiction, so I thought I would put this on this list. I've read 2 Japanese fiction books so far this year. Hopefully I will read more. This is not necessarily a challenge I expect to tick off every month, partly just because I don't own that many Japanese fiction, and it's not something that my library is massively stocked with, but I really enjoy Japanese literature, so I'm glad it's on my list. And then the final two, I have a Zaffa backlist book. So Zaffa is the publisher where I work, and obviously I'm constantly reading lots of stuff for work that is front list, but we also have a really rich and interesting backlist, and there's lots of authors I'm working on where I'm kind of working on their third book, but I haven't read their first or their second book or whatever. So I thought it would be quite nice to kind of aim to read a backlist book from Zaffa every month. And then finally, I just have like a free choice tick, because I also want every month to read a random book that has nothing to do with any of my goals, and I suppose. So this is very thorough and very detailed and very like crazily organised, which I find incredibly satisfying. But I also, although it's like weirdly organised, I also don't want to like feel forced to tick off everything every month. It's more just like a guide for the kind of things I might want to read every month. And like I said, I'm allowing myself to like double up books for different challenges and to use some work reading for slots that it does fit and stuff like that. Basically, this is just like goals plus, and I'm really enjoying it. And I think this is definitely a system I'm going to use in future, and I like having something pinned to my fridge that I get to tick off because it gives me a great sense of satisfaction. So I think that is all I wanted to say for today. I think this has been quite a long video actually, a bit of a rambly goals check-in, but hopefully some of you will have enjoyed it and found it interesting. Let me know if you did, because I'll aim to kind of do these every 3 months or so probably as we go through the year, and kind of let you know how I'm getting on with all of my goals. And that is it for today. Thank you so much for watching. Please let me know down in the comments what your reading goals have been or are for 2019 and how they're going. I'll be back very soon with another bookish video.